Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Bible Explained. This is the show where we go into deep detail of every word and sentence. And we're coming off the heels of Abraham's story here and where it really starts to kick off for Abraham. So, if you know anything about the Bible, Abraham's a huge champion, very, very well-known person in literature as well as secular media along with biblical media. So, here we go. Genesis 22, sometime later God tested Abraham, and he said unto him, Abraham. And I want to note that this is the New International Version, but you can follow along in King James Version, and I'm on Bible Gateway, so you can pick any version you want on the Bible Gateway. Again, Bible Gateway doesn't support the show. These are in quotes, so this is really extremely important that you understand that. In the Bible, randomly, you will see quotations with very little attributions to them. And it's incredibly important that you understand the quotations and who is saying things. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said unto him, who is he? Why is he capitalized? He is capitalized because it's the beginning of a new sentence. But if it were not the beginning of a new sentence and he was in the middle of the sentence, it would still be capitalized because it is referring to God. God tested Abraham. He said unto him, quote, Abraham. This is God himself speaking. And, quote, here I am, he replied. So Abraham replies, here I am. Verse 2, then God said, quote, take your son and your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain. I will show you. Pretty difficult. Your God. You worship your God. My God's not a savage God. He doesn't demand these crazy sacrifices. My God's not Baal. My God's not Satan. My God doesn't abide witchcraft and such horrendous sexual sins. My God is the God of glory. My God is a good God. And yet here he is asking Abraham to sacrifice his only child, right? It literally says that. Take your son, and it emphasizes this. This is very, very important. This is why I say you need context for this. You need to read the previous chapters up to this point. But it's really important. It states, your only son. Why would it say that? Take your son. What does it matter if it's his only son? Why would it emphasize that? Why are we adding that into this chapter? Why is that important to emphasize? Take your son, your only son, because it is his only son, and family lineage in that time is massively important for the person's name and their lineage to continue on. It emphasizes whom you love because there's plenty of stories in the Bible where the father or parents do not love the child for various reasons. Maybe they were evil. Maybe they have a different viewpoint. Maybe they themselves are evil. But it is important that these things are being emphasized. Whom you love, Isaac, states who it is exactly. And it shows where he is to be sacrificed and why. And God states that he will show him. And if you notice... here, there's nothing else that follows, right? It's just God's command, and Abraham doesn't argue this. Now, I personally really, really don't like this story because a lot of people will argue in the secular circles that, oh, well, God's such a loving God, but he tells Abraham to go kill his son, and, there just happens to magically be a goat there to prevent the sacrifice, but, what kind of God would tell a father to kill his only son? And it's really incredibly hard to defend a position and try to defend Old Testament God, because Old Testament God does some stuff that's not particularly the best. It's very, very difficult to defend the good Lord's actions when you see some of the stuff that does occur. I mean, very obviously this story is going to end on a very, very positive note, and there's a reason for that, and there's a reason the story occurs in the first place. But the point is, it is incredibly difficult to explain that to a secular person. They just want to take and pick out what seems to be the most psychotic delusions of an old man, and he was about ready to kill his own son. So let's continue on. Verse 3, early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. Now, we are going to look at this verse in particular again. He gets up early. He loads up his donkey. He takes 2 servants with him to help him, and again, he sets out once he's cut enough wood. He's taking all his supplies that he needs. Verse 4, on the 3rd day Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Verse 5, he said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. So please note that Abraham didn't say to his servants and in front of his son, hey, I'm just going to go casually kill my son over here. Don't worry about it. You just hang out here, chill, and I'll be back after I murder my own kid. Oh, and I probably will burn his corpse too. You know what I mean? He didn't say that. He said, we will worship. We will come back to you. So it's very, very unique and interesting, the word choice here. Abraham didn't lie. They definitely will worship, although I don't know about the we will come back to you part. But again, he technically didn't lie from a certain point of view, right? So he didn't lie, again, which is incredibly important to note here. There was no lies told because they do, in fact, come back. Verse 6, Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? So his son's getting wise to what's happening. His son's understanding. He's kind of curious. Where is the sacrifice? Where's the actual sacrifice? I don't think we need to go into deep detail here. He makes his son carry the firewood. He carries the knife and the fire. And his son is asking, where is the sacrifice? Verse 8, Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, son. And the 2 of them went on together. Now that's a very, very important thing. Abraham didn't state that God told him to sacrifice his own son, because that would be pretty wild. Maybe his son didn't want to be sacrificed. Maybe his son wouldn't understand. He would just run away, right? You know, I'm not going to die for you. And this God, if this God is telling you to kill me, obviously it's not a loving God who loves me. You know, I'm out of here, right? So instead, he just states the truth. God will provide a sacrifice for us. So there you go. Verse 9, when they had reached the place God had told them about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Verse 10, then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Verse 11, but the angel of the Lord called on him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. So again, it's incredibly difficult for me to defend this. Truly it is. It's very, very difficult. This story is framed in such a way that the good Lord owns everything in your life. Like, it's incredibly different for people to think in this way, but it's difficult to fathom that the good Lord could take literally everything from you. He could take your entire family. He could take everything you own and then replace it tenfold, right? So it's incredibly difficult for me to explain or defend the God of the old Bible when we have stories like this. But the obvious point is that the extreme devotion is rewarded in the end because the angel of the Lord appears, which, again, some people state that that is God himself, or that is an appointed representative or the mouthpiece of God, kind of like a messenger. And they state, hey, you need to stop, don't hurt the child. The good Lord sees what you have done, and now they know that you fear God. And it's unique and interesting because this is an outward symbol. This is an outward expression. The good Lord knows everything about us, right? So that's the first thing I want to comment. That's the first thing that I would say when approaching the story. If God knows everything about you, then how did he not know that Abraham didn't have a heart for the Lord and was fully integrated with God's theology and Holy Spirit, right? And that's a unique and interesting question too, because I feel like that this story is more for those who are reading about it. They are reading the story rather than the story about Abraham himself. I mean, obviously, we could put in the Bible, and God saw Abraham's heart and saw that he was fully committed to God and without reproach and had the fear of the Lord on him, right? And that would not be as impactful as Abraham literally getting up, going several days away to an area that God had told him to, and literally sacrificing his one lineage, his only blood son that was fully his and his wife's, right? And so this story is deeply impactful versus just writing that God knew that this person was fully committed to them. So that is my take on the situation. That's why there has to be an outward expression, because it's more for people who are going to read about this story later than people that are just trying to understand Abraham or Abraham himself as a character. So we're continuing on. The angel tells him, do not, because you have not withheld your son from me. And there's plenty of times in the Bible, there's a lot of times in the Bible, both New and Old Testament, where people will withhold things from God. They'll give 90% or 95%. And there's a lot of pastors who will preach on this, a lot of preachers who will talk about this, and they will state and they will sit and say, Christian-ish or partial Christian, but you're not a full Christian. You're not fully committed to God. You're 90% committed, but you still withhold that 10%. And there's huge debates for that. Are the nice things in your house, are you withholding from God because you have nice things in your house? Are you withholding from God because you have a nice sports car or you have a nice vehicle? Or is it that God has blessed you with these things? Or is it that, you don't really need the Porsche that you're driving around? You could downsize and you would be better off with that, right? So there's a lot to be debated. There's a lot up in the air with that interpretation. But the point being is that the story is trying to explain that by not withholding from God, God will provide. And that is what's going to happen here in verse 13. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Verse 14. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And on this day it's said, quote, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." And so there you go. Obviously, the story is about not withholding and God providing. It is very, very impactful because Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son, his only child. And that is very, very important for us to understand that when we give everything that we potentially have, the good Lord will find a way to provide it to us before we start to sacrifice from ourselves, something that we cannot give back. Now, there are many stories that may contradict this interpretation as well, and there may be subjective interpretations also that can kind of go into this, but the overall is that when Abraham provided his son and didn't hold back, God provided. Those are the three things that needs to be understood from this story. And so we continue on to verse 15. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from the heavens from the second time and said, quote, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of cities of your enemies, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." And so there you go. Very simple challenge, very, very difficult, very, very powerful one. But because Abraham didn't hold back his sacrificing his own son, the good Lord will now do what the good Lord does, and he will offer to bless you in a much greater number than what the singular sacrifice you were going to make was going to be. Verse 19, then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together to Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So that wraps up the big Abraham story, and we have something a little bit more coming here. But again, I just want to put the focus on Abraham's story. The story is that God requires a sacrifice of Abraham, perhaps the biggest sacrifice outside of him killing himself. Abraham does not withhold, does not try to bargain with God, does not say, "Oh Lord, Lord," anything but this. Abraham obeys what the good Lord says. When he goes and he is to the point where he's about to draw the blade, it is to the point where he has placed his son on the sacrificial altar, and he has the blade ready and the fire ready, and he is ready to sacrifice and slay his only son. God then stops him and provides a ram as a sacrifice. And so there you go. Because Abraham didn't hold back in the sacrifice, he will now, and his sons will be granted this covenant that his sons will be numerous on the earth instead of just one son and maybe a few family members. Maybe at most 100 or 1,000 family members over time. Now it'll be something like 100,000 to 1,000,000 to maybe even 1,000,000,000 or 1,000,000,000, right? Over time. Potentially, 6-7 billion people, right, are the descendants of Abraham. So there you go. There you have it. We're going to continue on. In verse 20, sometime later, Abraham was told, Micah is also a mother, and she has borne sons to your brother Nahor. 21, Uz the firstborn, Buz his brother, Kemuel the father of Aram, Kasad Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. Bethuel came the father of Rebekah. Micah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also had sons, Teba, Gaham, Tahash, and Mahakah. Makah. Some notable names we have right here: Abraham, Noah's sons, Micah, and Rebekah, right? The rest of the names, they have their importance, but those are the notable names. We're going to be getting into the story of Noah here, which is, again, equally very, very important, but it does translate into the descendants of Abraham, and this is the importance here, to tie the lineage together and explain the biblical stories. Some people also argue, and they get to the point where they're arguing things like, was Adam actually the lineage of Jesus Christ? And they try to trace the lineage back all the way to like King David, and how King David is related to Noah and Abraham, and how Abraham is related to Adam and Eve, and things like that. So this little footnote here is kind of important, and will lead into the next chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the Bible Explained. If you did, you can leave your comments, questions, concerns down in the section below. Feel free to challenge me, and hopefully you will be back here next week with another episode. Until then, I will see you in the next one.